Hey guys, Jason here with Cooperative Motorworks and Motorhome Rehab Branch. Today we're talking about the FiTech Force Fuel. If you've put fuel injection on your motorhome, or if you're thinking about it, this is one of the things that is really unavoidable. You pretty much have to put one of these on because we have shallow fuel tanks, and fuel injection doesn't work so well with shallow fuel tanks. So I'm going to kind of go into some of the details about these and what their purpose is and some just little tips and tricks about them. All right, so I have in front of me obviously three of these. This one that's upside down over here is a dual pump version. These ones are the ones we're traditionally putting in. They are a single high pressure fuel pump inside this little surge tank. So these are a 0.4 gallon tank that you can see. I'll pull this unit out so you can see just a 0.4 gallon tank with a high pressure fuel pump that's submersible. You can see my O-ring fell off, but that's okay. All right, that O-ring goes in this top lip to keep this thing sealed. All right, so the one over here, which is my left, your guys' right, is a dual pump version. You can see these two red ports here. These are all 6AN ports for fuel output or input. The red ports are the high pressure output. The black ports are input and output. They're coming from and going to the fuel tank. So you're going to have one of these is going to end up going coming from the fuel tank, going through a small fuel pump. We use something like this, a little inline fuel pump. This is only a 5 to 9 psi pump that we're using because it just needs to be enough to supply the engine with enough fuel to run, just like if it was a carburetor. The fuel pump inside here is going to pressurize it enough to actually inject the fuel. So it's not going to use a ton of fuel with this pump, but it's going to pressurize it at a much higher pressure. This pump's going to run continuous. So it's going to be pumping fuel the entire time your ignition is turned on or the fuel pump is turned on. We normally run these directly to an ignition hot source so that when you turn the key on, it's already pumping fuel up into this surge tank. When you shut the key off, it stops. The fuel pump, how it's set up, or how these are set up, is either one of these black ports can be fuel supply or fuel return. The one thing that they require is that the highest one, so if you were to mount this sideways, you would want the highest port to be the return back to the fuel tank. That way, when it fuels up, it just trickles back to the fuel tank. So if you have that at the lowest port and the fuel is coming in from the highest port, it's going to be just gravity bleeding back to the tank, and this thing may be empty. And if you ever have the fuel go below this input, the pickup on the fuel pump, then you're going to suck an air bubble and you're going to lose your fuel pressure, which is probably going to shut the engine off. I like to mount these straight up and down like they're mounted right now. It is possible to mount them on their side. We have done that in the past, but we ended up changing them because they make some funny noises when you mount them sideways. So we didn't like that. There's some bubbling and stuff like that that just, you know, wasn't pleasant to deal with. So we always mount these the same orientation, upright like this. You can see this mounting bracket that comes with it. It comes bolted to the bottom. You can take out these little bolts, and it comes with a place that you can stick it on the back. So you can take this off, mount it to wherever you're going to mount it, you know, get your holes drilled and everything, and then you can bolt it onto the back of this, and then bolt it to wherever you're bolting that to. So the electrical hookup on this is going to come from the FiTech throttle body itself. So that's going to have a wire that goes directly to what you can see is the positive port, and we'll have pictures of that. And then there's a ground that just goes to a ground wire, so any ground source works. These have a pressure gauge on them that shows the fuel pump output pressure. It should be around 60 psi when the engine's running. Sometimes what we end up doing, we typically take this off because where we mount these, the floor is right there and you can't look at it anyways. There's ways of looking down the throttle body and seeing if you have fuel pressure. There's other spots that you can mount this to get your fuel pressure. We normally just put a 1/8" pipe plug in there so that you just don't have that. You can leave this in, it's just, it gets a little closer to the the floor and it could, rub a little bit. But depending on where you install this, there's multiple spots that it can go. So, those are options. One thing that we have noticed with the first generation of these, when they first came out, we did have one issue with them, and they've rectified that since then. And I'm going to talk about that real quick, just in case if whoever's watching this might have one of those first gen ones that we missed. If the bolts on the top have a lock washer, that's a good thing. If they don't have a lock washer, if they just use Loctite on it, then there's a chance that the hose that connects this fuel pump and this barb right here, this hose right here, we've seen those fail a couple of times. The pressure in there, it blows out the side. And it's not because it's a low pressure hose, but it's because the hose that they were using originally was not rated for ethanol. If you're not using ethanol, you probably don't have a problem, but if you're using ethanol fuel, it weakens the outside of the hose and it can blow out, and then suddenly you're having a rough running issue. You may barely be able to idle, or you may not be able to run at all, depending on the severity of the blowout. You basically are losing, probably 90% of your fuel pressure at that point. What we did to fix that is we take this little clamp loose here, take these two clamps off, the fuel pump pulls off completely. We take a new piece of hose that is rated for high pressure ethanol fuel, something like the stuff that comes with the unit. And we take a chunk of that and install that in replacement of the fuel hose that's there. If you have the original one without the lock washers, it may be a good idea to carry around the tools and the piece of hose so that if you do end up having it break down on you, you can self-recovery. It's not a terribly hard thing to fix. You just take off, obviously, the fuel hoses, take off the bracket that's mounting it, and then you just have, I believe it's a 5/32 Allen key. We'll take off these bolts on the top, pull it apart, and you're looking at, flathead, and I believe that's also 5/32 for the clamp. And then you just reassemble it. We've also, because there's a metal port on each, or a spout, we put them as close together as possible. You do lose maybe a 1/4 inch on the bottom, but as long as this thing is submersed, even if it's only submersed to, a couple of inches above it, you're not going to have any issues on fuel pickup. So you can see there's a fuel sock in here. That's going to keep the majority of the debris out. We install one of these serviceable low pressure fuel filters before the fuel pump. That keeps the pump running longer, more longevity, especially if you're doing, well, I mean, if you have the original fuel tanks, you probably got a ton of rust and stuff in them because they're steel tanks, and pretty much every one that we've ever pulled out has been just covered in rust. But if you're going with our single aluminum fuel tank, when you first get it, just because of the manufacturing process, lots of welding stuff gets in there. The first couple times you fuel up, you're going to have to service this. That's why we give you one that you can actually look at. And so if you see this thing's all clogged up, it's disgusting, take it apart, clean it out, put it back together, go back on the road. I would say the first maybe couple fuel ups, you're probably going to have to do that. After that, it's normal service intervals. The O-ring, if you are doing the repair that I talked about, These O-rings, you want to probably talk to FiTech and have them send you one, because once they've actually hit fuel, they expand. So it's almost impossible to get them back into the little notch and, you know, not crush the gasket when you're putting it together. If you can take it apart without getting that gasket out, like you see I just did, then you may not have a problem. It'll probably seal again. So we've got the fuel hoses here. They come, the FiTech Force Fuel comes with this high pressure, high micron filter. So this is a 10 micron serviceable fuel filter. You can see it's got flow on it. All of these do, including the fuel pumps. So it says flow, it says 10 micron. You can unscrew it right here, and the filter comes out. It's a metal mesh filter. It's got this little spring in there. It's magnetic, you can see. So that's also going to pick up any metal particles or anything like that. Basically just clean this out, you know, blow back through it or whatever you got to do, tap it out. So if you have any issues with not getting enough fuel, that would be one of the spots to look at. Always when we have fuel injection issues, they're not running right, cleaning the fuel filters is like the first thing to go to. You know, after that, there's a couple of things that we can talk you through, but that's like the number one thing that we see makes people go down for fuel injection. So that can go back together. One other thing is this actually comes with the Force Fuel as well. This little guy right here is a fuel return. It's almost acts like a rivet. So it's a blind thing. You can tap it into any fuel tank. So if your fuel tank doesn't have a fuel return port, which like our single aluminum fuel tanks have a return port dedicated, it's meant for that. Whereas like the original fuel tanks, the steel ones, they don't have that. This comes with the kit. It comes set up with this little 6AN filter or fitting on there and this bolt in it. You take the bolt out, take the 6AN fitting out, drill a 1/2 inch hole into the tank somewhere on a flat plane, put that nipple through with this rubber gasket on the backside, and then you're going to install this bolt, and you want to hold port from moving and tighten this bolt down, and it'll mushroom this and it'll create a seal on it. So this will balloon out, and now you have a sealed fuel return port in any fuel tank that you have. So that's how they solve the problem of having fuel return, because if you're carbureted, then you probably didn't have a fuel return. The fuel pump that we send, if you're getting the kit, it probably is unopened. It has this little metal fuel filter in there that can screw right into it. We don't use those because it's going to get clogged and you're not going to be able to tell it's clogged. So just toss that or use it for something else, maybe your generator fuel filter or something like that. It comes with these 2 ports that'll go on each end, and then, you know, use your serviceable one that you can actually see what the condition of it is, and you'll probably thank us for that. That is pretty much it for the setup. If you guys have any questions, send us a message and I'll try to answer them. All right, thank you.